All right, welcome back to the show, the Time to Grow Up Dad podcast. I'm the host Chong, and today I've got Hayden. Well, Doctor Hayden, technically. Is that how you like to be addressed?
To be honest, mate, I hardly ever use the doctor title. It's one of those things that I guess I could pull out if I really wanted to, but it's kind of just not within my usual practice. And also, the probably main caveat to that is I've worked in the health system for the last 4 years. So if I was pulling out the doctor title too regularly, people would start to be like, "Why is he not our clinical advisor?" Thinking that I was a medical doctor when in fact I am not a medical doctor working in health, so I don't really want to use that title too much, just in case people try and pull me into some sort of clinical advice work, and I don't want to act like I know that.
Fair enough, mate. Well, since we already got there, what do you do? What's sort of your sort of day to day like? What do you do for work? Obviously you run a pretty cool sort of coaching and podcast as well. Maybe give our listeners a little bit more of a insight on that.
Yeah, so during the day, my I guess 9 to 5 or 8 to 4:30 with a half-hour lunch break, whatever way you want to think about it.
Yep.
Um, I work in the health sector here in New Zealand, so I work for Health NZ in one of the central region teams and the commissioning team. So that kind of involves, I guess, having a really good understanding of the health system as a whole in New Zealand, and contracting of primary and community services predominantly. So I was an academic for about 8 years at UCO, and I did my PhD while I was there and tapering for maximal strength. And so that was kind of my thing for 8 years, and then there just came a stage where I kind of needed a bit of a change from that, and we weren't moving out of Palmerston North, so I sort of had to look at what was around, and I thought, health, that's pretty similar to exercise, and it has a bit of a link with exercise, so I'll try that. And so I've been working in the health sector for the last 4 years, and then throughout that time and prior to that, I've been running my own coaching stuff. So I run that through what's called HJP method, strength and conditioning, and I've been doing that for must nearly be a decade now, or pretty close to it. It's always been a part-time thing on the side where I work with a few people, and predominantly strength athletes, so powerlifters, weightlifters, and also probably more recently, your general everyday person that wants to get a bit stronger and is interested in strength and conditioning and wants to be a stronger version of themselves, really. And that's kind of come from the podcast, which I started at the start of last year, the Stronger Dads Collective. And so that's been really cool in terms of being able to explore that parenthood piece, because for me, what is it, 3.5, 4 years in December that I will have had our first kid, and we've got two now. So that's kind of become a massive part of my life, as I'm sure you're aware that as soon as you've got the family, it becomes a real big priority, and changes your perspective on probably everything in life.
Yeah, like I think I wrote a little bit of a blurb, or I'm planning to do like a post or something, but sort of reflecting back like 10 years ago, training and staying healthy and fit. Obviously you and I are both, involved in the health and fitness industry in some
Mm,
way, shape or form. So of course that sort of plays a bit of a, I guess to us it is a big part of our lives. But then the
yeah.
moment you start a family, they come along. A lot of the things that that tends to work even when you're married but no kids, it just kind of
Mm,
goes out the window. A lot of the strategies and the optimizations and optimizing sleep, yeah, mate, like that ain't gonna happen. Like it's we get a lot of that on social media on what you should be doing, but the reality, or I guess the not really harsh reality, the truth is that for most people who have families, it's not always going to be the case.
Yeah,
um yeah.
100%. I think that sleep thing is a really good one. Like, it's such a funny one because, um, as you said, sort of before kids, you do have a whole lot more control over that, the environment, all of those different aspects. And then you have kids and you realize how little control the majority of people, who have children, regardless of what age they are, probably have over their sleep schedules because you'll be interrupted. I think especially during this first sort of, I guess, early childhood years, when you've got babies,
Mm.
toddlers, and then young kids, when sleep isn't always as, I don't know,
Stable.
structured as you would like. Yeah, stable is probably a good word. It kind of changes all the time, and you'll think you've got something down pat, and then next minute it sort of blows up in your face, and that doesn't work anymore. It's really funny, and it's even for us, our two kids so far, they're way different in terms of how we've operated with the sleep side of things. Like Harvey was really needy. You had to hold him all the time. You couldn't just put him into bed. Whereas Toby doesn't seem to worry as much, although that is changing in the last couple of weeks. You can put him down awake and he'll fall to sleep. Whereas if you did that with Harvey, you would have screaming, until you picked him up again. So it's just really weird that the temperaments of the two kids, even from the same parents, are completely different. And so you can think that you've got it under control or that you know how the sleep thing works, whichever way it is, whether it's really hands-on or whether it's, you can actually let them lie down on their own. It is a funny thing that there's such a big difference. And, just because you've got it right once doesn't mean it's going to work the second time or in the same way the second time. Thankfully, our second one's been a slightly better sleeper. But as I say, at the moment, that seems to be changing, which is frustrating. But hey, it is what it is.
Yeah, I've got a lot of different feedbacks from parents, and it's like no two kids are alike. And I think like it's very funny because when we had our first, so Henry, when we had him, the advice was like you can learn everything, but you don't really know until it happens. And then you kind of like
Yeah.
in the moment you're like, oh yeah, I get that, of course, understandable. But then when it happens, then the message really sinks in. You're like, so that's what they mean by you don't like you can learn everything, but you don't really know till it happens. And I think
It's a,
to
it's
your
a little
point,
bit like that Mike Tyson one, mate. Everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face. It's a
yeah,
similar
hundred
sort of thing,
percent,
but with parenting, it's until you've got a child screaming in your ear at 1 o'clock in the morning.
yeah, and yeah, and to your point too, like the whole one kid's different to the other. And again, people have told me about it. For full disclosure as well, we've got a second one coming that's due in March.
Congrats.
And yeah, yeah, sure, the sleep is gonna go way down again. But it's kind of one of those things like until it happens, you don't really know. There's a lot
Mm,
of things, I guess, with like in our relative fields, like with exercise and weight loss, there's some level of predictability. Like
yeah.
how hard you push, how hard you taper, you probably have a higher success rate. Or with nutrition, it's like cool if you eat a certain way, there's possibly a higher success rate of fat loss. But with kids, it's like yeah, take a stab in the dark, take a stab in the dark, and then
Yeah, and I think
see
there
what
are like
happens.
general rules and general things that work, but I think you kind of realize the real, I guess, unpredictability of things. Like you can try something and it'll work one night, and there's always those funny memes. Like it's like I had the biggest sleep suit, and we went down at this time, and they ate this for dinner, and the light was at this level or whatever it is. Like you go through all these series of things and you try to replicate it because they slept through that night or whatever it is, and it is really funny because you can know everything and yet it just or think you know everything, and then the reality hits you and actually I guess humans are complex systems and we see that in training and diet and all of those things, right? We understand that already, but it is completely different when they are this unpredictable and this complex. And also, I think the individuality part is really interesting, and that's probably you might find that out with your second, and potentially they'll be identical to your first, and you'll know everything. But I think
Yes.
it's quite funny, like how much that can change. And a lot of people have said to us, oh, it's because you're more relaxed now, second time round, and there may be an element of that, like you don't stress about the little
Mm,
things as much because you've kind of been there, done that.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
actually, I think there is a massive temperament between Toby and Harvey in terms of how they fall to sleep, even, like um, that whole thing of having to be held to go to sleep for Harvey pretty much from day
Oh
dot.
yeah.
And then Toby from early on never needed that. And it's just, I don't know. I didn't think we did anything different. I don't know. Maybe there is some weird psychological thing they pick up on our relaxedness, but I don't think so. I think it is a lot of the temperament of the kid. Um, but yeah, there probably is an argument that we are a bit more relaxed, and also we probably just can't give them the same attention that we gave Harvey, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And that's sort of the before the previous guest I spoke to, Dean, who's the owner of the Right Fit. There's like a couple of
Mm,
personal training studios up here in Auckland, and he's got two coming to a third in a
yeah,
couple, I think, couple months. And one thing he said was like, your first child, everything's careful. You can't bump them, whatever. But when the second one comes along, it's kind of like, we've been here, we've done that. But probably the biggest thing is like the attention
Mm.
that whole like, because I think as a first, I'm the only child in my family, so I guess to a degree I've never really experienced that.
Yeah.
But it's like your parents will always give you the attention, and then obviously the second one comes along, you don't really know how their psyche works because they don't really speak English at this point in time, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, my parents are not giving me the attention that I was getting prior. I think not that it's a good or bad thing. I just think that definitely plays on the mind of a 2 or 3 year old for sure. I think to a degree.
Yeah, and I think that's probably something, with the second kid coming up for you, and probably one of the things that I think Sash, my wife, was quite good at being, thoughtful about, was trying to find ways that you could still be giving Harvey his time, and you could
Mm.
still be focusing on him. And so there were little things that she did in terms, and she's far more organized and gift giver than me, but like planning things like so that when the baby's born, actually Harvey gets given something, and sort of
Ah,
encouraging the
okay.
parents come to visit when we have the baby to actually give Harvey some attention and maybe just bring him something little that's special so that he still gets, a little bit of that and doesn't get
Right.
sort of, I guess, angry at this kid that's taking his
Yeah. Okay.
attention.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So some
Yeah.
of those things worked quite well just to give him a little bit of,
Mm.
so that he's not completely forgotten. Obviously, the attention's still going to be on the new kid, right? Because he's the new kid on the block at that stage early on and everyone's coming to see
Yes.
him. But trying to find those little ways that you can just create a little bit of, I guess, attention for the other child. I think that was really cool. And that's something that Sash did really well. And she's a planner, so she's always very thoughtful with that sort of stuff. But that I think helped a little bit. Obviously, it is still way different though for him now because obviously, if mum's feeding, well, he can't just run in. So it has kind of been quite cool for me as well to strengthen my relationship with Harvey a whole lot more because mum is, having to be the one doing the feeding. I can't do feeding. I don't have the right,
Mm.
the right
Unfortunate.
appendages on my chest to be able to help with that. Well,
Unfortunately.
unfortunately, and probably also fortunately for sleeping at nighttime, I guess. But I've kind of had to, be more the responsible parent for Harvey now. Like rather than us sort of sharing that
Yeah.
duty, that's almost had to become my thing because mum's having to look after Toby when he's at that little really fully dependent stage. And I mean, that'll evolve and change as he gets older. But it's been a really cool thing for that relationship with Harvey because he now will come to me for things. And rather than being mummy, mummy, it's daddy, daddy,
Yeah.
which is really cool for me because I've got to have that stronger, closer relationship. So that's kind of, I guess, the win from a dad
The win.
perspective
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
second is I have got to take the reins a little bit in terms of being the parent that is responsible and the parent that is kind of his go-to. And that's obviously not all the time because I'm working and Sasha, is at home working a couple of days a week at the moment now. So she'll still see more of Harvey. But, when I'm around, it's quite clear that Harvey knows that I'm the one that he's going to go nag for stuff because mum will be looking after Toby. But
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
probably has changed that ability as well to spend as much time with the younger one as well, right? Because if you've got Harvey coming at you and mum's more responsible, you've almost divided these duties up, which is it's quite funny really that you do that. But I guess that, people say once you've got a couple, it's divide and conquer, right? And then once you've got three, you're outnumbered. So there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
But
So basically, from what I'm hearing, is stop at 2, don't go to 3.
well, that's going to be
two's
our
like two's like two,
dilemma.
yeah. Three's like that's a rough one.
Yeah, and I think it's again like everything you adjust to it, right? You kind of figure out how you're going to survive, and there's always that teething period where things are really, really hard. Um, but I imagine that there'll be that initial period which will be really, really challenging. But probably once the kids get a little bit older, they can entertain each other a little bit more. And I remember having a conversation with a colleague of mine a couple of years back, and he had 7 kids, and I sort of sat down with him like, man, how did you manage that? And he goes, well, once we got past, I think it was 3, he said, the older ones take care of the younger ones for you. So it's not a big concern.
Yeah.
So the more kids you get, obviously the older ones get. And so therefore they can actually contribute a bit more and be a bit more helpful around the house and doing things and then being obviously a bit considerate because if you're the eldest, right, and you had 7 kids, they've got 6 siblings. So for years and years and years, they've had
It's
these younger
always
people and they know how it works. So I guess, by that stage, you've probably got at least 12-year-old, I would say, in the house who can probably help with the 2 or 3-year-old that's not the
some
newborn.
level of competence.
Yeah. So it was interesting because I sort of think 3, man, that's a lot. But then 7, I was like, geez, how'd you do that? And so he sort of said, yeah, well, actually the kids kind of become really, really helpful the older they get. So That was an
teach them
interesting insight.
teaches them, I guess, like responsibilities as well to a degree, I
Mm,
suppose. Like, you do this, you do that, and then they sort of almost go, ah, like I'm doing things that my dad and my mom are doing. I've been given almost a mentor to do certain things. I think that definitely can help to, well,
yeah,
potentially help develop their mental abilities to be responsible.
yeah. I just sort of think, imagine once you've got a teenager and a toddler at once, though, like terrible twos or whatever they call it,
Yeah,
and a teenager at once. That must be quite hard work.
yeah, that'll be hard.
So
That's
I'm
why,
I'm I'm not
yeah,
going for seven, just so you know. I'm not going for
yeah,
seven. I
and that's
think
why
if
also
we have
we,
one more, three will probably be our limit. I don't think I would go above three, but we're still teetering on, in a couple of
teetering on
years
a bit.
whether or not we would go for three. I don't think we've made any hard and fast decisions, which
Hard
I
and
don't
fast
think you should when
decisions.
you're in the thick of the,
Yeah, in the
first year
thick
of
of
parenting.
things. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, like our thought process there was kind of keeping it close, like in terms of the age
Mm,
gap, because I know that a few people, and I guess it made sense in my head too. Like they'll be kind of playing the same toys. They'll be sort of
yeah.
exposed to kind of
What's
similar,
your
if not.
going to be?
So second one, no idea name, gender, due in March. By then, Henry will be turning 2 in
Two.
April.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it'll be like two years apart. So pretty much like the stuff that would be, potentially doing, exposed to, will be, for the most part, relatively similar. And that's sort of the
Mm.
thought process, because we were thinking about it as like, okay, like if we're gonna do this, we might as well rather not sleep for 5 years straight than not sleep for 3 years and then get a taste of the good life and then back into it again.
It is a
It
bit
kind of
hard to
almost,
start again. Have to be honest
yeah,
with you, mate.
yeah.
Harvey was
So
3, so
we,
he had got into a bit of a rhythm. So, and then we had the next
yeah,
one, had Toby, and yeah, it was literally like, oh, this is what it was like.
yeah. And so that's what we had in mind. We were like, you know what, like as soon as possible, let's just not that we want to get it done with, but it's kind of like, hey, like logically, that's probably the best decision.
Yeah, it is
From
funny
a
though because
timeline standpoint.
Harvey has never been a fantastic like sleeper. Even when he was probably twos and threes, he'd still wake up a couple of times, but he was quite easy to soothe. And sort of after that sort of year to 18 months time frame, I think it was, once Sasha wasn't breastfeeding, I would be the one that would do the nights. So we sort of swapped
Yep,
duties, and
yep.
then I've just obviously carried on being nights for Harvey. So I had a pretty good system, and he'd maybe wake up once, maybe twice before Toby was born. So, but it was always go straight back to sleep. It wasn't like a calm them down,
No,
settle them. It was normally pretty simple process, and then back to sleep. So I don't know. For a parent, I feel like waking up for a few minutes, a couple of times a night, it's not too bad.
yeah, it's pretty. I would say to all parents out there, that's probably like just get used to it. It's
Yeah,
probably the
yeah.
most. It's the common denominator between all parents that you will have to get up at night. It ranges from 5 minutes to 2 hours, depending on how lucky you get.
My question for you then is, with that in mind, because this is something that I consistently, struggle with to an extent, right? So the kids go to bed for us around about 7ish. Probably everyone's asleep by 7:30 normally most nights. Um, and then for me, the thing I struggle with is I'm like, that's the time that I get to myself. And so therefore I have this
Oh yeah,
tendency to stay up longer than I should, because I'm like, this is my time. And so therefore actually at the moment, like the thing that I know, and this is me actually just, thinking about my thought process right now. For me, I'm like, I know that the smartest thing I could possibly do, that probably make the biggest thing for my health, fitness, mental well-being, everything, would be actually just to like have a hard and fast deadline that like 10 p.m. or whatever it is, the lights go off, the phone's away, everything's done, and they go straight to
uh,
sleep, rather than like teetering on my phone for another half an hour or so, because you don't know if the kid's going to wake up at 5:30, 6:30, 7. Like normally it's 7, but not always. Like it's often any time sort of that 60 90 minutes before. So how do you manage that? And I don't know if you have the same problem, that tendency that right at the night, it's my time, it's our time. We can kind of, sometimes for me that's to do some coaching or whatever it is, and that sort of stuff gets done. And then I have to have my time at the end. And I'm like, I struggle with the whole right. I need to turn off the light and go to bed. What are your strategies around that?
oh, I think for me personally, I am in the mind of like, for the most part, when everyone's awake, everyone being like Henry, Claire, my wife, and until everyone goes to bed. So basically from any time they wake up until everyone goes to bed. And obviously within that time period, I'm obviously working because it's a day. Usually my thought process there is that, all right, during that period of time, it's very unlikely I'll be able to get anything done for myself. Maybe a half an hour, but that's kind of it. So, and then we talk about sacrifices. One thing that it's ironic because we opened the episode with sleep. One thing that I almost kind of told myself, it's like, you know what, like I'll go to bed early because at that point I'm kind of gassed anyway. But then I'll get up really early to kind of get all my stuff done. So my sort of thought process is I get up at 5, train or jujitsu. So jujitsu starts at 6. If I hit the gym, I get my session starts about 5:30. Come back, shower, and then this is a hobby that you might potentially get into depending on how deep you want to go. Attempt to my best abilities without waking the house up. Make coffee like from scratch. So like, and that's a hobby that I actually got into because we had Henry. I was like, all right, I need coffee. No way I'm surviving off no coffee, and espresso tastes like rubbish. And so the hobby that I got into ever since he was born was coffee. And so I would try to use that as my little like alone time. That takes like 5 minutes to make, from scratch, grinding.
What sort of coffee do you do?
So at the moment I'm into, I don't know how into your coffees, but at the moment I'm into a lot of the light roasts at the moment. And I try.
How do you prepare it though? Like, are you doing espresso, AeroPress? What's the other one that we have?
Yeah,
the
so
stove. Not there's a stove top, and then Chemex is the other one that I always liked. Oh, V60. Yeah.
So I maybe last month I was definitely a V60. This month I've kind of switched back to espresso. But yeah, like so that would, and then probably my favorite though would always be a cortado. So like,
what's that?
Espresso shot. So it's sort of like espresso, but not like a full-on latte. It's kind of like almost like a 1-to-1 ratio of like coffee to milk.
Do you still do the like, thickened milk, froth milk?
Yeah. So it's only like 1-to-1. So that's sort of like my favorite because it gives me a bit of.
I would say that's almost what I did this morning, mate, because I actually just did a quad shot with my normal amount of milk, but there was obviously this milk. So it was probably closer to the ratio.
The ratio adds up. Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of my like what I do for like my alone time. I think one of the biggest.
How do you force the other side? Because this is the part that I'm like, how do I mentally change my mindset? And sorry, this has become bad for you now. It's because I'm on a podcast, mate. I'm used to hosting. Like, what are the sort of? Is it just you've got yourself into the routine that you always have, the early night, or because you're getting up at 5, obviously for you, you probably need to be in bed by 9 or whatever it might be to actually get enough sleep, or to try and get sufficient or some sleep.
I think like I think like something sort of just clicked. It's like I could stay up, and sometimes we do. Like it's funny because we actually talked like literally before Clay went out to work today, as we were talking about like watching Inside Out 2. Which is on Disney Plus, just came out literally I think yesterday. So this is going to be one of those like nights where we probably will stay up way past my bedtime. My bedtime's usually at 9 usually. I think to how I kind of came to this little like, or force myself, very similar to I guess your situation with Harvey in a way where you need to cuddle him to sleep.
Not so much anymore. Not so much anymore, which is nice. Yeah.
So currently, I have to, for the most part, I am on sleep duty. We kind of get used to Henry to sleep with me because when the second one comes,
100%.
And by the time he's asleep, I'm like half asleep. I'm like, and I walk out of the room. I'm like, you know what? Like I want to watch something, but there's no way in hell I'll be able to stay up for another 5 minutes. So I'm like, in a way, I force myself to sleep by putting him to sleep. And then because the room's dark, and I'm kind of like, well, this is it, like I might have, sometimes I'll have like a cheeky podcast or like some music while he's like, while he's there and I'm on his bed and he's on his side. But then for the most part, when I walk out of his room, I'm like, oh, I'm done. So like psychologically, I want to do something, but then like the body's just like, nope.
Yeah. Yeah, so you don't
Yeah.
have the
So
same sort of mental thing with me because you're already feeling pretty sleepy by then, whereas I probably have a good 2 or so hours from Harvey to bed.
yeah.
Um,
But
anyway,
to be
but
fair,
that could be something that at some stage maybe we can catch up on, and you can hold me accountable to see if I've actually
for
managed to have that
sure.
light off at 10 o'clock each night, because that is the hard. Well, that is
That
the
is
thing
the
that I
hard.
think at the moment would make the biggest difference in terms of my progress in strength and conditioning and my, ability to function well executively, during the day. Um,
Yeah.
so I'm like, I know this, and I like. It's funny. I often use the example of, education isn't enough. Like, people have to have a reason and prioritize something of my lawn.
That's it.
So and this is ultimate dad chats here. So when we built our house, there was no section done. We had to do all the landscaping ourselves. And so, you know, we got like 8 trailer loads worth of dirt dumped in. We did it with a wheelbarrow, moved it around. Sasha's dad helped me out. It was
Crazy.
it was backbreaking stuff, and so I was really really invested, like in the lawn being really really good. And so
Yeah.
I was listening to lawn stuff on YouTube. It was my complete and utter obsession for a good probably, I don't know, 3 to 6 months, was understanding how to do the best lawn. And so I have all this information. I have all of this knowledge about the lawn. For the first year, it was pretty damn good. Then we had Toby, and then it started to like just slowly teeter off, and like the amount of attention I was paying, it went back. And then, you had the first winter and moss came and it got hard to manage and all of these things. And then it sort of just got to that stage where I'm like, I just don't care enough anymore. Like, I know every single thing
Yeah.
I should do. I know when I should put a pre-emergent, what fertilizers to use. I know, that we should be aerating the lawn at this stage or scarifying it at this stage and then adding this product and blah, blah, blah. And like, I know all of that. I do nothing. Like,
Yeah.
I'll put some fertilizer down a little bit every now and again and I'll mow it. And it's like, mate, you literally know everything you need to do to have this good outcome, but you choose not to, right? And that's, I think, the thing for me that's been one of the biggest eye openers in terms of thinking about education around exercise and diet, is you have to still actually be willing to make the choice. And I think that's literally part of what this
100%.
nighttime sleep thing is for me, right? Is I have to be willing to make the choice, because I know sleep hygiene, blah, blah, blah. And obviously I don't think that's as applicable when you're a parent, because I think you're probably tired enough, you can fall asleep most nights anyway, unless I have my caffeine till too late. So those coffees have to be before
Yeah,
lunchtime for
like
me.
before lunchtime. Yeah,
But it's
for
like,
me.
that's that's one of those things that's taught me the most, I think, just from, absorbing all this education, understanding everything, but then realizing actually there's an element to keeping your lawn nice that involves a lot of hard work and a lot of time. And at the moment, I don't have the desire to prioritize that in my life, because actually it's more important for me to spend time with my kids than outside with my grass. And
Yeah.
also, the money I would have to spend on some of those products and things, it's just not the thing I want to be spending my money
Let's
on.
get
And so
someone
there's
involved.
these
It's like,
there's this
yeah,
factors that kind of lead to me just thinking, well, actually it is really funny, because it really demonstrates that you can know a whole lot of stuff and you can have all of this education and know the steps you should be taking, but unless you choose to take those steps and prioritize whatever that thing is, because you have to at some stage choose what are your priorities and what's important and do those things, you won't necessarily work towards that goal, even though you know everything about how to do it.
yeah, yeah. Do
And I
you
know
think
that's a
like
bit of
that?
an aside, but I think that's me with
Yeah,
sleep, right?
yeah.
I know what I need to do. And actually, there's no reason financially why I can't do it. There's no reason psychologically why I can't do it. I just have to actually make the choice to say the me time is between 7:30 or 8 and 9:30 slash
Mm,
10. And after that, yep, cool, listen to an audiobook or something as you're falling to sleep. But
yeah,
remove the light, actually be gone by 10 o'clock, you're sleeping.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Do you think like that's like what you said there? Obviously, with like the knowing and obviously needing the will, the drive, motivation, and
Hmm.
all the life values and stuff to actually do it. I guess that's also kind of very much with like coaching, in your case in the past, like coaching high level athletes. Obviously they're very very driven, like you tell them what
Hmm.
to do, they'll be like, cool, we'll do it, right? And then obviously with kids it's like you tell them, they don't know anything. But then
Yeah,
I
yeah.
guess to that point, very very somewhat tangential, but do you think like the whole concept, if you will, of you can know all the stuff, but you need a priorities will come first, and then depending on how
Hmm.
the application of that will happen. Do you find that in your own personal life, after becoming a parent, that becomes a lot more prevalent as opposed to prior to becoming a parent?
Like
Because you've obviously,
in terms of having to prioritize things more,
yeah,
or
or I guess like
think more about those things.
yeah, think more about those things because, of course, you've been coaching for
100%.
so long. Like I said, like you've been coaching for a decade. I'm sure you and I can probably both agree when we coach high level athletes to gym hop, it's like, hey, we always have the discussion, right? It's like, these are all the things, but what do you want? Like, what do you think? Like, is this doable? Blah 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 blah. But yeah, like, to my point there, do you feel like that's become like? Do you think a lot more about it ever since becoming a parent?
I think so, and predominantly, as you say, like because I was powerlifting internationally, what 10 years ago now, competing at international level in powerlifting, and I always think about how during that time it was really simple for me to prioritize that, right? Like, yes, I
Oh
had
yeah,
work and I had those things, but actually it was quite easy. And I was married at the time. It was quite easy to say, right, from this time to this time, I'm going to the gym, and I could spend 2 hours, sometimes 3 hours, on a weekend, training, and probably resting far too long between sets, but it didn't actually
yeah,
matter, like I could do that and it didn't interfere with what was going on. And so since becoming a parent, like even the way I program probably for others as well is I'm always real conscious of the like, okay, so how much time can you spend? Like, are these sessions too long? Is this okay? Like, thinking those sorts of things because I'm like thinking if you give me a training session that's going to take me 90 minutes or longer, not happening. Like
not
45,
happening.
45 to 60, even though I've got I've got goals with my strength stuff at the moment, but each session is probably 45 to 60, stretch maybe 75. If I go and train with Jono and we have a catch up and a yarn, like, maybe we're
Yeah,
75 minutes or so. But he's got kids now too, so we're both aware that we want to get home and help. And that's the thing. The key I think there is want to get home and help. Like
yeah,
I
yeah,
don't actually want to be in the gym for 90 minutes to 120 minutes because I've got things that are more important to me that I want to get back for. So it does make me way more conscious of, okay, this is going to take this long. And I think the other part of it is becoming way more thoughtful in how you plan about when you will get things done as well. Like I'm quite fortunate that my day job is quite flexible. I don't have hard and fast start times and end times. I have work that I need to get done, and I'll get that work done. And sometimes that means being more flexible with my job, but that also means I get more flexibility to kind of shoot out at lunch and combine my breaks and do everything at once, so that I'm not having to have a real rigid. Here's your 15-minute smoko. Here's your other 15-minute afternoon smoko, and here's your half an hour, 45 minutes unpaid for lunch, whatever it is. Like I can just put all that together and be like, right, I'm off to the gym and I'll be back at this time. And as long as I'm
yeah,
communicating that effectively, then it's good. But being really deliberate with that stuff, I think, has become really key for me. And I think, as you say, because I've been doing this a while, it's something that I choose to prioritize. It's something I want to do. But that doesn't mean it's simple to always fit it in, right? You still have to be really deliberate in how you think about it and where you can place it in the day. Like, for instance, this morning, I was looking at my schedule. I'm like, I'm not going to have time during the day to get out and do anything. So I'm going to have to do this in the morning. So I had to get up a bit earlier, help with the children before I left home a little bit, not as much as I probably should have. And then I shot off to the gym prior to starting work for the day. And it was just, that was how it was going to work today. I don't necessarily prefer to train in the mornings myself personally. And it's become a lot harder now that if I get up, Harvey gets up. Like, it's just, he's got into that routine where he can't now stay in bed, which I used to do what you did when Harvey was probably between 2 and 3, or maybe 1.5 and 2.5, where he would just stay asleep, so it was fine. I could go and do what I want. But now if he realizes that I'm up, he's up, and so I can't do that because Mum's obviously been doing the nights with baby. So
yeah,
so now I've had to switch. I'm like, right, during the day or evenings is kind of when it becomes, but I don't like evenings because I don't get to spend as much time with Sash, and then I also don't want to go to sleep. As it's funny, but you kind of do what you're doing. And yes, you become way more deliberate and you realize how much you have to prioritize things. But I think you also realize that just because it's like hard to fit something in doesn't mean that you can't or you shouldn't try, because you you can be organized and you can actually make this stuff happen. Like, everyone has the same amount of time in a day, and you can be really deliberate in how you use it. And it's not a like grind mindset, I'm going to do more than you, whatever. It's actually just, okay, how can I structure my day in a way that enables me to get each of the things that I want to do in it? And for me, that means that I try and train as much as I can when I'm either not needing to be home with the kids, so during a workday type scenario, I just might extend that a little bit, or B, evenings when the kids are asleep, because that's my other time. Or then weekends is when I'll try and get my longer sessions in, because that enables me that when I'm home from work, I can try as hard as I can to be fully present with the kids, because for me, that's my most important piece of the day,
yeah,
right? Is I only get 2 to 3 hours with them, really in the afternoons and maybe an hour in the mornings before work. So it's like, if I don't take advantage of that, like that's pretty stink. You're at work for so
Yeah,
long. So for me, like I don't want my training to interfere with the time that I would have with my kids. So I'm not going to be able to train when I would have when I was younger, which would have been straight after work. I would have gone and got something done, because I could then, and it didn't matter if we had dinner a little bit later. Whereas now, it's how can I fit it around that? Because for me, that's priority number one. So you
yeah,
can't negotiate with that. That is what it is. Every now and again, something might interfere, but it's pretty limited. So that's priority number one. That sets sort of the like, right, this is my concrete big rocks. Is I've got work here, I've got kids time here and here. So it needs to fit outside of that or within that if I can make it work during the day. And like,
yeah,
yeah, it's structuring it in such a way. What's number one? What's number two? What's number three? And then build your
yeah.
plan
Then go from
accordingly. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, we're getting close to the 40-minute mark, so I've got a really good question here for you then, which I
Sweet.
generally ask every person so far. What's your biggest takeaway being a parent so far?
There's so many ways you could answer that.
So it's like, I don't, yeah,
And I
but
read this
hence,
question because you had told me about that question prior, but I
hence,
sort of,
hence, hence the wording biggest. Technically speaking, it
mm,
could only really be one. Technically speaking.
I think for me with this is probably my biggest thing is like truly understanding what it means to be flexible. And by that, I mean, with kids, you have no ability to really know what's going to happen next. Like you can have a plan in place and you can think that this is going to happen at this time or that's going to happen at that time, but there are just so many variables that can change things. And so, for me, being someone who was a pretty organized, structured person, and I still am to an extent, being able to be adaptable and flexible in that planning has been really, really key to me and has really taught me a lot, about myself and having to, I guess, not change who I am as a person, but be willing to go with the flow a whole lot more. And my wife would probably say that I've always been go with the flow, but I don't think so. Like I've always had these are the things I need to get done in this way, and please don't interrupt my plan, sort of thing, like in my head. And so
Yeah.
having kids has been really, really good for teaching me that ability to be flexible and patient. Probably is the other word that goes along with that flexibility, right? Because
Mm,
things can change on a dime. Like you can think you're going to get a really nice long sleep tonight, and then it's the night that they wake up 3 4 times, they won't go back to sleep, they're not settled, and you have
yeah.
a big training session planned tomorrow, and you just have to be like, I have to be flexible with this. Either I change the session, I lower my expectations about the session. Could be the exact same thing with work. You come in and you're just absolutely drained, so you need to be able to change what tasks you're focusing on today. So having that flexibility in my mindset and approach has probably been the biggest thing, and it's something that I don't think without another being in your life that you can really understand either, because it's easy to say be flexible on that, but actually typically prior to kids you have control over that flexibility, like you can choose it, whereas once you have kids it's part and parcel of being a parent. So that's what kind of springs to my mind, is having to be flexible, and then probably alongside that is the patient side, because yeah, you just can't control things, man.
Yeah.
It really teaches you to control the controllables and then let everything else happen, because you don't have that much
Yeah.
control as you think you do in life.
Yeah, it's that old sort of stoic mindset slash philosophy. It's control what you can control. There's
Mm.
probably going to be 1,001 things that you probably won't even expect. You,
Mm.
you
Mm.
think you think it's going to happen. Yeah, trust me, it's not going to happen the way that you think it's going to happen.
And like it's funny because I don't think that I think that's a real positive lesson to take away
I
from
mean,
it
for sure, for
as
sure.
well. And like change is just part of life, right? So it's kind of teaching you something that's going to probably actually be a really valuable lesson in every aspect of your life, right? We've talked before the show started about the restructures and things happening at my work and the uncontrollable stuff there. And like, I think there's an element of that you can kind of take that a little bit more in your stride because of the kids, having taught you already that things aren't always rainbows and sunshine, nothing is concrete, the path will change. And you kind of have to have an element of flexibility in everything in life. And so that's been a really valuable lesson and something that I think has changed about me. And hopefully my wife would agree that I've become a bit more patient and flexible since that.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, probably. Well, that's awesome, mate. I think that's a very good way to sort of in this episode. Like you sort of indicated, we can probably dive a little bit more into other stuff as well in other episodes. But yeah, I think definitely a lot of takeaways from me, kind of on my end for sure. And like I said at the start, the second one's coming, and a lot of these sort of conversations, having it with parents, particularly who have one and more. Because in my own personal life, I never really had a second sibling, so I could never really sort of comprehend what or how my parents would do things, because I'm always the only child. But then
Yeah.
I'm literally being thrown into the deep end. I'm pretty lucky in a sense that my wife has siblings, which obviously I will be leaning quite a lot on her, particularly with our in-laws as well, and kind of just understanding on how best to parent two and more. And it's always been very refreshing speaking to people who have more than one kid, because then I can go, yeah, like, okay, yeah, oh yeah, for sure, we'll, like, yeah, for sure, we'll take that board. Because at this point, it's like what you said, right? Like, just get the theory in, just understand, just get the theory in. When it happens, but at least you somewhat have a little bit of a um, direction. Not really, I guess, like milestones that maybe you can kind of consider and think about.
Yeah, and I mean, we're going in with two. You're never going to know everything that's going to happen. The kids are going to be different, and that whole going with the flow is part of it. But as you say, it is nice to have a little bit of an understanding of what some people have done and has been helpful. But yeah, we could dive into that a whole lot more. So we won't start that one.
All right. Before we wrap up, then, where can people find you? You've obviously got some coaching services, some podcast, fire away, and I'll put that in show notes.
Cool, yeah. So the podcast I have is called the Stronger Dads Collective, and so the idea is to help people, fathers, become stronger versions of themselves as dads, people, and in their athletic pursuits. And so there's sometimes episodes where it's just me spinning yarns about training concepts or life or what's happening with my stuff, and then a lot of the time we tend to try and get guests on as well and have a bit of a chat through kind of how they've managed to, I guess, navigate that parenthood journey. And many of the guests are still quite high level athletes, and so that's always been quite an intriguing one for me, is how they've managed to balance those two things, because as we know, things change a whole lot. So that's the podcast, and then you can find me on Instagram at HJP_stronger dads. So yeah, and then you can kind of see what's going on from there, and there's some links there if you want to check out any of the coaching and stuff. But otherwise, yeah, it'd be awesome to have you listening to the pod, and hopefully it's valuable. I as a bit like yourself, I kind of, a lot of the podcast, there's a bit of a selfish nature of that, like it's not really about how many people are going to get listening. Part of it is actually I get to have conversations with other dads about being a good father. And so for me, I think that's a really valuable thing, regardless of if I get 1 or 1,000 listens. Like it's cool, and I feel quite fortunate to have those conversations, and I appreciate you inviting me onto this podcast, mate.
No worries. Well, that's it for today. Hope you guys enjoy the episode, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for coming on.
No worries.